welcome to Pause for Payments. I'm Kristy Duncan, and it is my absolute pleasure to have a discussion today with Emily Kucukalic of Brand New You in Australia. Welcome, Emily.
Hi, Kristy. It's great to be here.
Thanks so much for joining me. I am so looking forward to today's discussion, Emily. You're just one of these amazing brand ambassadors for Australia, but brand ambassadors for the financial services industry, and someone who truly, truly believes that your own personal brand is so important, and you portray that so well. And I'm hoping that you've built a whole company around this. And it's so awesome. Can you share with us how you came to believe that personal branding is so important?
Yeah. Okay. That's a great starting question. It's the story of me, I guess. Sadly, nearly 20 years ago now, I used to work for EDS, which many of your members would recall. And I looked after marketing and communications for all of Asia Pacific. When we did deals at EDS, they were always really big deals. So we were doing like $1 billion outsourcing deal with a large bank, Commonwealth Bank actually. It was the largest outsourcing deal of its time when it was done. And in that sort of situation, we actually only had 2 or 3 or 10 people in the client base that really made that final decision that we were actually selling to. So as a marketer, we used to go bananas that we never had enough money to be able to build these great sort of Coca-Cola style brands, and no one outside of the industry knew who EDS was. And it was when I was there that I just started realizing that actually people buy from people. They don't buy from organizations. And that was probably the company that I found that the clearest, most obvious, because the individual who represented the organization created the trust and the recognition within the client that they'd be able to bring the greater organization behind them. And then I also started realizing that for me personally, throughout my career, the best jobs I'd ever had were when I got to work for people that I truly liked, valued, and esteemed. So I realized also people don't work for organizations, they work for people. And in fact, I moved throughout my career to work with the same man who was, my greatest mentor. And I didn't even think about where I was going. I just went to work with him. So back then, I even had the idea of calling it Brand New You, and sort of fast forward about 10 years from then, I had the opportunity, a break in my career, to start the business, sort of logged online to see if the copy, the trademark was available, and it still was. So I was like, that's serendipity. And now we've been at it for 11 years. So that's it started as a real need within an organization, and people just weren't thinking about it back then. Now, personal branding is really hot. Our competitors are people who tell people to wear, we'll do your colors. We don't do that. That's not my background is marketing, and this was born of how do I create great attraction with customers and loyalty, and it comes down to people.
Awesome. Well, clearly now building those relationships and the trust is so important, especially in this new COVID-19 pandemic environment, and trying to build those relationships and that personal brand is totally different from the way we used to do it, back in 2019. And
well, that time ago.
Yeah, eons ago, it seems. How does the concept of personal brand or building it or supporting it change in this new environment?
So when it all started, I sat down and went, great, 11 years of hard work. Who's going to buy a personal brand now? I'm done. It's actually really interesting. We're certainly not growing at any super rate, but we're definitely going to be here on the other side of this. And we have another, number of clients coming back to us. And the reason is it's actually really simple if you think about it. Just look at the environment we're in. Corporations or organizations have spent a lot of money, time, and effort in building their brands. And pre-corona, we would go and have a meeting in each other's offices. I might Google where to go first. An image of your office building might come up with some branding. Some other stuff about your company might come up. Then I go and meet you in, particularly in your industry, in a really beautiful, snazzy work environment that's been fully branded and designed. I walk into reception, etc. So all the way through, I'm seeing MasterCard or Visa or, American Express, whatever the brand might be. And I'm totally aware and I'm biased all the way up to the actual individual moment when I meet the person. Today, all of our meetings are being done online. We have people's, I am actually in my office. It's a very cool Sydney office in a warehouse. But a lot of us are working from home. We're seeing for the first time people's, private lives. I was having a meeting the other day and someone's cat came right through and we got to see the back of the cat, which was really charming, right in front of the, uncontrollable. There are children, there's husbands, there's wives, there's partners. People's personal brands are now actually the dominant brand. So the people that work for you in your organization or the people in your team are representing themselves in an individual space. The other thing that's interesting too is within the Zoom environment or whatever, online environment you're using, status has gone because we all have equal square boxes. Anyone can talk at any time. We might go into a meeting and not necessarily know who's who. People aren't yet, and they may, putting their titles in, in their names. Like yours says Kristy Duncan's Women in Payment. I might not know what your role is within that organisation. I had a meeting with a university this week and their names were S4692 and S4693. So, which was really interesting. I was like, guys, you need to change that. That's not okay. Unless you're Elon Musk's child, you actually need a name. So I think actually your personal brand has become the most important. The other thing that I think is really interesting is, and I'm sure you've been through this, some people have just really rallied and become the full person they were going to be. Some people have been kind, have been helpful, have been service focused. Other people have reacted really differently. So I think people will remember people after COVID and reward those that engaged and did all that they could, and and recall those that there are people, certainly in some of my client organisations, where they've been told to reduce their hours. I think you call it furloughing, we call it stood down in Australia. People just saying, well, I'm not doing anything if I'm not getting paid, and not a great, we call them career limiting moves back in the olden days. So I think we can do a lot of damage and a lot of great to our personal brand at the moment as well.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I've heard one comment from a couple of different places, and I really see this in action, is that when we get into a group Zoom meeting like this, where everybody's just a little box on the screen, all of a sudden everybody has equal space on that screen.
Yes.
So it's no longer the, and I'm going to generalize here, but it's no longer the alpha male in the meeting who dominates the decision.
Totally. And for countries like Australia, all of a sudden I'm a peer with the person from, New York or the person from London, which, we don't usually get that kind of ranking.
So in that way, it's kind of equalizing in the new work from home environment, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. And I think what's happening is some of the people who were quieter in the meetings because they didn't get a chance, or maybe they're the introvert, or they're less comfortable speaking out in that kind of environment, are perhaps more able and willing to do so in this little, everybody gets their own little Hollywood Squares box.
I think too, and it's interesting you bring up introvert, because you can probably tell, but Kristy definitely knows that I'm an extrovert with a capital E. And for probably the past 10 years, we've kind of dominated leadership positions in the Western world. COVID is incredibly hard for extroverts. It's the time of introversion domination. And that's because introverts have gone wicked. I can work from home. I can put my head down. There's less meetings. I'll get stuff done. I'm okay not interacting with people. There's a part of me that kind of doesn't mind this. Interacting on Zoom is enough. Everything's good. Whereas the extroverts are bouncing off the wall because they can't, like for me personally, who's going to listen to me? I need an audience. And I think also there's going to be we're talking, which is kind of really interesting, we're talking about this idea of going from mindful to meaningful. And introverts are really good with meaningful. So what I mean by mindful to meaningful is mindfulness was the buzzword, okay? And we've all talked about being mindful. Mindful comes from a world of plenty. Mindful comes from, there's so much coming at me. I need to take time. I need to be in the moment. I need to not get stressed out. There's an element of self-indulgence in it because it's very self-focused. It's all about me. With a world that's significantly less plentiful, where we're having to interact online, and we were talking about it before, it's a significantly more trying environment, having to look at yourself for a long time. The meaningful conversations are becoming much more important. And so introverts are much better at meaningful conversations because in general, they don't speak unless they have something worth saying. So we think there's going to be this big shift from mindful to meaningful, to actually having shorter, more quality conversations. I was reading a really interesting article about social dating. So people who use Tinder and Bumble, etc. And it's almost gone back to Jane Austen times where the interactions are all online. They're requiring a meaningful interaction. So there actually will probably be a significant uptick in meaningful relationships on the other side versus the, you know, swipe left, swipe right thing that apparently young people do. So it's this concept of having to actually build, you know, real relationships. So I think introverts are going to do really well. And I think this mindful to meaningful thing is a big shift that's going to start happen. It's probably about time.
Well, as an introvert, that makes me happy. But what tips do you have then for extroverts to migrate to this new reality?
Yeah, it's interesting. Look, I think the big, you know, certainly for me, it's been about checking in with people on a regular basis, thinking at length about, you know, most extroverts have quite big networks. So thinking at length about people that may or may not be dealing with situations. So I personally would check in with 3 to 5 people a day. How you going? Just, you know, we talk a lot in personal branding. We use the VIA character strengths, and I know we've talked about this before. Working out what your strengths are and really playing to them, because times of crisis, which, you know, we are going through, and we probably will be going through for some time. I saw some very depressing economic figures yesterday globally. Looking and thinking about those things and taking your strengths and playing to them. So for me personally, my number one strength is fun, humor and playfulness. So using that to cheer people up. I have a lot of friends who ring me up and say, I just rang you to get, you know, to have a laugh. My second strength is love of learning. So using this time to really indulge that, which has been fantastic. So I think everyone, extroverts or introverts, know your strengths and use them as much as you can during this time to help others and to, dare I say it, pivot.
Yes, pivot is something a lot of people and a lot of companies are doing these days as we reimagine ourselves in a far more digital world and a far a far more isolated world. We're kind of cocooning by forced to do so, sadly. It'll be very interesting to see what the world looks like as we one day emerge out of it. I want to talk a little bit about our audience being women in financial services and fintech, which is a typically very conservative industry, as you know, and you've got a number of financial services clients, I know. But they do this while trying to manage new risks. Can you tell me how important do you see brand is in terms of a career strategy?
I think that it is the, you know, talk my own book. I think it's the most important thing because I think at the end of the day, you will always get to a point where there's yourself and 2 other operators who are equally capable as you at the technical side of the role, or your skill set will be equal to someone else's. So really the delta, the thing that will get you selected over another person, is the emotional component of your brand, how you make people feel. And that's really what personal branding is about. So the ability to, the people that are really doing really, really well at the moment are those that can make people feel like they have an answer. So the people who are willing, so their strengths, talking about strengths, would be things like courage and bravery and leadership. Those that say, I don't know what the future is, but I'm going to give this a red hot go. And the other people that are really dominating that I'm seeing are those that are the networkers, those that know other people and can connect you with people. And both of those things are not about technical capability. They're about the way you make people feel. So I think more important than ever in your industry. So your industry is going to dominate a lot of the growth and the things that are doing really well, certainly an Australian company, Afterpay. You're seeing organisations like that. Payment platforms, we have seen in Australia, pretty much no one takes cash because it's theoretically got corona on it. So that's a very, very, that's an amazing movement for your industry to go to basically a cashless society. But I think probably the most important thing for your members is the women word. And I know it always has been, but I was on a really interesting conversation with a group of women in your industry, Money Magazine and a couple of other people. They were journos in Australia, and I'm sure this is the same for all the Western democracies. The industries that are getting hammered are the ones that have predominantly female employees, certainly in Australia, tourism, travel, hospitality, all the beauty services, all those sorts of things. I know that as much work as we've done to changing the home environment, there's been mums and dads homeschooling, and certainly in my culture, that burden still largely rests on the woman, at the very least, because the kid comes to the woman and says mum as opposed to dad. And trust me, I've tried very hard to bend my child the other way, but I still got that. And I think that they're going to need a lot of help financially and guidance, which again, the women in your industry will be able to help them, because again, we've got the largest share of non-full-time workers. So I think we're going to see a lot of requirement to really step up our game as women to help other women, more so than ever before. It's going to be less about leadership positions and more about just helping people get through this financially.
Yeah, those are all really good points, Emily. And I see it too from this side of the world. And it's a lot of it is just community building and supporting other women in our community, because women, just drafting my remarks for another event this week, and women tend to really be the supporters, the supporters of the family. They support their, extended family. They do the elder care, supporting the parents and the grandparents. They do the child care. They do the homeschooling. They manage the family. They support their friends and their community. And so really so much of what we do is supporting other people. And now more than ever, that community needs to be strong. Even if we're isolated in our own little homes, we need to be able to support each other, because as you say, the stresses through this situation, this pandemic, are far higher than in a normal day-to-day life. 2019 and
well, it's really interesting too, because this environment, the Zoom environment, gross generalization, the Zoom environment is much more how males communicate. It's I'm speaking, I'm highlighted, you're speaking, you're highlighted. It's that kind of, whereas females knit in the way they communicate. They just sit there and not actually knitting. We knit multiple threads between each other. We touch each other. We look at each other. We communicate by having conversations that aren't necessarily about work. We build our relationships through very female methods in the way that we communicate. So it's quite interesting that this format is much more male focused. It's much more delivery of information, absorption of information, and a lot less of that sort of interactive knitting. And I was lucky enough to be invited on a call on Friday evening with one of the big, they're called Loan Market. They're a mortgage broker, one of the really big ones in Australia. And it was the leading ladies of Loan Market. And I hopped on expecting to be having this kind of conversation. They were all having wines and cheese. They started, and it was amazing. One of them said, what's your best tips for Netflix? And it just started. And there was chats going on. And I realized that I was really missing that is how females communicate. And we got to meaty, decent conversations. And we had a lady talking about she'd signed an enormous book of work in the last month in a very difficult environment. And, she talked about how she'd done that, etc. But it was that wonderful female camaraderie that was bred. And then we still had those conversations. And I'm missing that. And I think we need to acknowledge that women need to communicate like that and bring that back in, because there's so much strength in that in an environment that we're in right now. And if you think back to the days of the Depression and stuff like that, the women held, but they held society together through temperance halls and all those kind of community environments that were built through the church, all those sorts of things. So we have to kind of allow ourselves to have those Netflix conversations and just chat rather than just always this very kind of masculine form of communication.
I love that, Emily, and it plays right into something that we've been doing with Women in Payments. Is we're starting a Palm Cafe. So our Palm is our platform of members, and we're doing monthly. I'd like to do them every week or two. A Palm Cafe where we just set a time and we invite someone to host, and then anybody in our community from around the world can dial in. No pre-registration, just dial in. And we had the first one a couple of weeks ago, and it was awesome. We had people from 5 countries all chatting about payment, Netflix, and as you say,
Yes.
anything and everything. And it was just lovely to have that community, that outlet, that connection, the whole discussion.
Yes.
Great.
And being able to be female. I mean, I've personally really suffered because I have a male husband, I have a male son, I have a gay male brother and his partner, and the people that work in my office are males. So I realized there was something sort of kooky and off edge with me, and we're allowed to start seeing people. And one of my friends invited me over to her house, and it was myself and 2 females, and I could feel this just sort of weight lift off. And I realized that what it was, and I love all the males in my life, and they're wonderful males, but I had just literally been pummeled with, actually it's from Canada, Rust Valley Restorers. It's like car shows. And I love cars, and it's a great car show, but this relentless car show. And I was like, I just need to get out of here. So yeah, it's been nice to reconnect with females.
Yeah, no, it's really important. And so often your female friends are the ones who will last you throughout your lifetime. The men kind of come and go sometimes, but often the females will be lifelong friends. So coming kind of towards the end of our discussion, I want to ask you, with your amazing expertise and experience in the financial services market where our audience sits, can you suggest 3 takeaways for women in payments who are listening to help build their personal brand in this industry? Like, what does that look like?
So in the current environment or just in general?
Well, why don't we do kind of 2 and 2?
Yeah, okay. I think back to that, the first thing is that know your strengths. If you don't know them, I can send Kristy the link, and I will, Kristy, actually, maybe if people want to, it's free, and it was developed by the best psychologists in America. Know your strengths, work out what they are, decide how to lead with them. How do you use them in this environment and in any other environment? I think voice is always really important to women. So we use a model in our industry, in our business, called the 7-38-55 rule, which was created in the late 60s by a psychiatrist at UCLA, professor. And he found that my ability to make you like me is based 7% on content, 38% on how I speak, so not my accent, the kind of authority and gravitas that I have, and 55% is my physical presence. So obviously that's kind of easier to understand when you're having face-to-face meetings with people. But the 7%, I suspect in the current environment, the content has probably gone up. So that's my point about being meaningful. Thinking about what you're saying. You don't have all those non-verbal cues. You can't say something offensive and then kind of go, oh, sorry, Kristy, and like tap you, or, you know, and you can get away with a lot through touch, and we don't have touch. So really concentrating on content and meaningful content, and that voice. So really be conscious in the current environment of breath. It's a really weird thing, but we breathe in unison. So even over, you know, from Canada to Sydney, if I hold my breath, you don't breathe till I breathe. Did you feel that? And all the people watching have just done that too. So be really conscious of breath, because the more you breathe into a conversation, the better that conversation will be. And that includes, in the current environment, not starting sentences with sighs. I work with a number of people, you know, and things are hard. But if you say to me, how is it in Sydney? And I go, well, it's a good question. I have biased everything that comes after that just with one breath out. Versus if I say, that's a really good question, Kristy, look, things are really tough here at the moment. Here's what we're doing. It's a very different, it's what we call the voice of authority, or the pilot's voice. So I think that second one is being really conscious of how you breathe into conversations. And the third one is about that 55%, the physical presence, is don't stop dressing up. Don't stop wearing the right clothes for your role. Don't fall into that wearing sweatpants, or you know, just because you're at home, you're still working. There's incredible amounts of research. Probably the best and the easiest one to relate to is a Yale Management School study of 128 men. They didn't look at women, aged 18 to 32, and they had to negotiate a financial outcome. And they had three groups of people. They had people who were wearing the clothes they came in, people who were wearing sweatsuits, and people who were wearing suits. Across the board, the people in the suits made $830,000 more in the negotiation outcomes. That was the average delta. So because we think big picture when we're dressed differently, we think we're at work. You can't trick yourself. You can't wear a suit top and then undies on the bottom. I don't know, that's probably a different word for you. That's very Australian to call them undies. Your underwear or tracksuit pants, you know, because you know that you're sitting there without the rest of you dressed. So I think that's really important. It's respectful to you. It says, Kristy, I really find you important enough to get dressed up for, and it's respectful to me as well. So I think that 55% still matters a great deal, and costume still matters. So they'd probably be my three big things at the moment to think about. And that's probably a moment and afterwards as well. I think one other thing that actually one other point, and it comes from a guy called Keith Johnston, who I think is originally from Chicago. He's the father of, he's considered the father of improvisation. So if anyone goes and does improv training, comedians and things like that, they go to this Keith Johnston. And he has this one rule about improvisation, and it's be more average. And it's probably the least, the weirdest piece of advice you'd expect someone like me to say. But if you're in an environment, again, where we don't have that touch face to face, and you're trying to be funny and trying to be clever and trying to impress, you will fail on all of those. Whereas if you come back into just this, be more average, try to just it's really amazing how interested people are in when you're just when you're just authentic and real versus, you know, and you would know this in women's groups. I don't know about you, but when I go to those sessions and some woman stands on stage and says, I have 4 degrees and a PhD in mathematics and I gave birth to 4 children and my husband stays home and looks after them, and I exercise 4 hours a day and I don't eat fat and I'm dominating my, and I just sit there and just hate myself. I just sit there and think, oh my God, I'm like the worst person. I've done none of those. I'm a complete mess. I'm such a failure. Whereas I've done a few of those kind of talks where I've just gone, oh my God, I remember at EDS locking myself in the promotional cupboard and just crying and, you know, lying under desks and crying and, you know, and being really honest about those things. And suddenly people just connect with you more. So be more average. It's a really powerful thing to remind yourself of, because actually average is so much more interesting than interesting. If you don't believe me, just Google Kim Kardashian on Instagram. It's boring. It's just boring because she's so perfect. And there's a falseness to it. It's like, yeah, no one has a life like that.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that was one of the recommendations coming from Christine Lagarde, former head of the IMF, was she said, be authentic, be your authentic self.
I would like to be.
Yeah, no
It's
kidding.
just awesome.
Yeah, she's a real role model for me, for sure. For sure. She's done a lot of things right. But still not an easy job.
Oh.
But she carries herself with great poise and commands a lot of respect. So a lot of
and
very
possibly
tough.
the most stylish woman in leadership at the moment. She's just,
Yay. Well, she's French.
It helps. It's not something as an Australian I'm ever going to be able to pass off, but I'd like to.
Oh, you do an awesome job. Are you crazy? No, you're bang on. Absolutely perfect. Emily, thank you so much for joining us here today. Your insights are always very, very to the point, entertaining, but also very meaningful. And they relate to our audience very, very well. And putting them into context of the COVID-19 has been really helpful. The whole people buy from people and people work for people concepts are so basic, but something we don't always think about. So that personal branding comes through in so many different ways. Thank you for sharing.
Thank you. And thank you so much for inviting me to be on. The extrovert in me loves these, so I'm back whenever you need me again.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much. To close, I'm going to encourage our audience to join us online for many other Pause for Payment sessions. And we're hosting many inspirational leaders like Emily from around the world on topics of industry as well as career topics. So join us for the one next week. Thanks very much, everyone.